Hello, my name is Bobby Nguyen. A little bit about me. I have a background in hospitality, marketing, and social media management. I started off in the food service industry and eventually transitioned into social media marketing and management. I attended UMSL for media studies because I've always had an interest in the entertainment industry, whether it was music or movies, and I dabbled into social media management for a little bit, but I no longer love the role I was in. But one thing I did enjoy was looking at the data and engagement metrics. I reached out to a few friends of mine that work in tech, and they eventually informed me of how data analytics is a good field for me to look into because of the background I had. So I started Savvy Coders about 12 weeks ago, and so far it's been a challenging but enriching experience. And I decided to do my capstone project on something media related, which is music sales. All right. Out of pure curiosity, I asked myself, what psychological impact can social media or the current state of our culture have on its consumers, and how does it change the trajectory of when it comes to how we consume media? For this project, I knew the process of extraction was going to be done a little backwards. I found my data through the official RIAA, it's very hard to say, website, and the chart data was presented in the Tableau they had publicly. I downloaded the file, and then I converted it back to a CSV file for me to view the data in a more organized format. The next step was cleaning up the data using Python, pandas, and other multiple methods, but there were a few problems. And after seeking help from various sources, we kept on running to the same hardware issue. So we eventually used SQL to clean up my data instead. I cleaned and stored the data through SQL using basic coding. To briefly explain, I needed certain information from the CSV file. For example, the case when expression is the SQL equivalent to the if then else statement from Python, and that was able to pull the columns I needed. Once everything was cleaned up, the next process was graphing the chart and analyzing my hypothesis. So in the pre-digital era, 8-tracks were first introduced in the 1960s in collaboration with multiple companies. William Lear worked with Ford to make this new way of consuming music extremely car-friendly. By 1965, customers had the option of having an 8-track player to be included in their 1966 Ford model. It became a quick revolution in the music industry, as it was the first time drivers could choose what they wanted to hear in their vehicles. Home players were eventually made and became competition with vinyl sales. 8-tracks were at its peak in 1978 with about $3.9 billion in sales. People loved that these 8-tracks offered high quality sound, and the biggest hits from popular rock bands were released on this format at the time. Troops over in Vietnam were also listening to 8-tracks while exploring the wild. However, customers noticed it had many underlying problems, and eventually they were replaced by the audio cassette, and the 8-tracks quickly became obsolete, as you can see this decline in the chart. So with the compact cassette, it was originally developed and released by Philips in 1962 in Belgium. It was a new attempt to develop a new standard in audio storage. By inventing the cassette tape, it allowed anyone to make recordings without high technical skills that were needed for reel-to-reel. On its initial release, the cassette tape was chunky and it had low sound quality. Its purpose was for recording voices and dictation, but it soon took a turn for the better. Soon came the Sony's Walkman that made music portable for the average person. The cassette tape peaked in popularity by the late 1980s, peaking at $7.8 billion in sales. But then a shift happened where the market had drastically dropped in both Europe and North America. By 2001, cassettes had pretty much dropped out of this race, for its market shares were less than 5%, and the following year, US music companies had stopped producing them. As we compare the US chart data, it's important to note that while the cassette had been around in the late 1960s, it didn't become easily accessible and popular in the US until the late 70s and all of the 80s. All right, so the story of how the CD became about dates all the way back to 1957, but today we will focus on when it entered the US market and changed the way we all consumed music at the time. So in 1979, during a press conference in Japan, Philips and Sony stunned the world with the announcement that both companies would jointly develop the compact disc. Then a new deal was forged, and the two companies worked together for the next few years to make the compact disc. And I want to point out one of the reasons why it became so popular was because not only was it a new way to record and play music, but it also had better data storage capability, higher bandwidth capabilities, better audio quality, and it was much cheaper to produce. Following an initial offering of around 20 available albums at launch, the CD's unofficial arrival came with the release of Dire Straits Brothers' In Arms album, which was recorded on the latest digital equipment and spawned a tour sponsored by Philips as well. Released on CD in May 1985, the hit album became a musical mainstay, and vinyl fans and audiophiles began to purchase CD players in droves to adopt the growing format. By 1991, the CD overtook the cassette in sales. It peaked in the year 2000 with $13.2 billion in sales. The comparisons of the three different data sets show you how the culture was moving at the time. Looking over the data and the chart comparisons, I can tell you that the technology is progressing at a fast rate through time, and more people have access to such technological advancements. So it only makes sense that music is part of the discussion because it is always evolving. As we move towards the fifth era of recorded music, I want to mention the ringtone and ringback time that people forgot about. I was surprised to see this included in the data set, but at the end of the day, music sales are music sales. In the 2000s, we saw technology progress even further with the advancements of computers and cell phones. It seemed like every other family had a household desktop computer at one point when I was younger, and every parent had a Nokia, brick, or flip phone. During this time, CDs were still popular, and consumers figured out how to download music and put it on blank CDs, and we called it burning CDs. Napster was a thing, but I don't remember anyone that I knew that had it. And I think with the arrival of iTunes, it changed how we all consume music to this very day. Looking at this chart, I see that the highest sales for ringtones were in 2007 and 2008, eventually peaking at $1.1 billion in sales. The reason for the decline soon after might be because of the arrival of the iPhone and the smartphones that soon followed. People figured out how to make ringtones from the computers or phones, and there was no need to purchase ringtones at this point. When you look at the charts for digital album downloads, you can see that it was a brief period in time, but still should be looked at as the birth of the digital revolution. Some years may look high, but compared to CD sales, it was very weak. The highest peak for downloaded music sales was in 2013 at $1.4 billion. I see it as a transactional phase between physical products and cloud-based music, such as Spotify and Apple Music. Downloads lasted for a few years as the leading source of revenue in the recorded music industry. That's the shortest era in the industry's history ever. There are many reasons for the decline, and I think one of the reasons being that downloaded albums were very easy to copy and redistribute on the internet. Artists and labels were also losing money, and not to mention we were also in a recession during that time, and many people wanted to hold on to their money, so things had to change. I like this chart because it shows how much CDs had such a huge impact on our lives for the longest time. With paid subscription, I discovered this data set reflects the number of subscribers. I looked at the data and thought the numbers should have been different, and it didn't really make sense. So I went to the official RIAA website, and I saw it listed 84 million subscribers to streaming services in 2021. With $8.9 billion in sales. I'm very happy I double checked because I would have made a wrong interpretation of the graph. This chart shows the overall average of the sales. And when I looked at the state of our society few years ago, many people had to stay home because of COVID restrictions. Streams naturally went up in all areas, whether it was music or video streaming. And I think this chart reflects that perfectly. I saved vinyl for last because I think its history and slow comeback is the most unique of them all to talk about. The popularity of vinyls date back to the early 1900s, but in the 60s and 70s, that was the public's preferred method of consuming music at the time. It eventually fell off once the 8-tracks and cassettes became more accessible to the market, and introduction to the compact discs eventually killed off the vinyl. However, in more recent years, we have seen a resurgence in vinyl and vinyl record sales. Survey and research shows that millennials and Gen Z are actually the driving force behind the vinyl. I believe this is because people love the idea of nostalgia and they want to be part of something. They want to be part of a time when things were different and they didn't experience this growing up. Also, when you listen to music on a CD or vinyl, there's something they're different and more authentic about listening to the album from start to finish without skipping from artist to artist or song to song. Given the technological advancements we have made in the music industry, vinyl sales have steadily been increasing the past 13 years. What is interesting is that vinyl sales surpassed CD sales in 2020, and I think it would only rise from here. To further analyze my hypothesis, I think the history of the music industry is also the story of the development of technology through the years. The data was easy for me to interpret once I was able to graph it and see what was going on in each decade during the time. Another observation I made is that anytime before the next big thing takes over the market, sales for that format were already climbing before it would take over. And with the rise of social media in the past decade, it makes sense to me that the younger generation can influence the masses when it comes to consumerism, and that has been the case for vinyl sales. Technology is also evolving at a rapid pace, and through analyzing these data sets, I think consumers will buy into what is technologically current at that time. But also in the age of social media and influencers, we also know that they have the power to influence people to buy what is trendy or cool at the time, as we're seeing it with the rise of vinyl and CD sales. I predict that in 10 years, we will see compact discs back on shelves, and the growing popularity with vinyls in recent years won't stop there. Streaming will not go away anytime soon, however, and at least consumers have options now. That's it.